All right. I am so happy to be here. And it's funny that we're talking about newsletters because if you had asked me, I don't know, 4 years ago about newsletters, I'd be like, well, I know you need one. Or I know a little bit, but mainly I knew how to use somebody else's, if that makes sense. And I had to learn all about newsletters when I started working for Connie. And I just had to jump in. And so I know sometimes how daunting it is because like, well, what do we put in there? What do we do? So I am curious right now, what are the questions that you have? What are the questions you have about newsletters? Like you put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself, or where are you finding your blocks right now in creating a newsletter?
I think I just still am having a hard time wrapping my head around what it is and what it should look like. And I keep, for some reason, that old church newsletter keeps coming back into my brain. And I know it's not supposed to look like that. So is there like an easy, these are the things to look for. These are, I mean, I know it's something that we've already posted mostly, but somehow I'm still just not, it's just not easy for me. How's that?
Do we need to put a style that goes along with that? Like what Carrie's talking about, do you want to have a style as far as, how we have social media all look a certain way, or you want it to look a certain way? Do you have, I'm sure you incorporate, I know Connie does, incorporates a picture and the coloring, the same color as the website and all of that. I mean, obviously you want it to kind of flow together with your newsletter and social media, correct?
Yeah, I love, yes, I'm writing down your questions because I want to like make sure that I get all of those. So yes. So let me start real quick. We're going to, I'm just going to go through this. And some of you, I know that a lot of you, like you ladies, have heard this before. So I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit. Okay, you can see that okay, right? Because I lost you. Okay. So this is what I'm hearing. I know like we've talked about why do I even need one? And so I'll go through that super quickly, but I like, what do I write is something that I know one of you asked me recently is what I have even valuable? Like getting right. And then I love, how do I get started? Where do I lead them? I love your questions. What does it look like? How can we make this doable so it doesn't feel like that church newsletter, that kind of thing. Okay. So then just quickly, just a reminder.
It's slow, or it's small. I mean, we're seeing.
Or is it really tiny? Okay. Let me do
that. Better.
Boom. Let me do this. And then is that better?
Yep. That's much better.
Okay. I had two screens and so it was doing wonky. Okay. So this is just really, just recap. Okay. Why you need one, right? You want to capture your audience. You can control your content. It's delivered right to your audience. And the biggest thing is you can nurture them, right? So, because how many people, I mean, how many of us have heard, I'm trying to get off social media, right? Or I'm just not sure. We can't control if they open it. We can't control if they're going to read it, but we know that we can get it right into their inbox. And if anything should be shut down, social media is gone for a day or longer, you always can get their email address. And it means they've given you permission to send them stuff. That's a big deal, is that they've given you permission. Okay. So the next thing is, this is a question I get is, well, what do I even write? And so here is what I'm going to recommend you. The first thing is go back to your one big message. Okay. What are the outcomes in your message? You should have 3 to 5 outcomes written out. And then what I recommend is you could even create a Google Doc that has, or a Google Sheet. I like a spreadsheet. And at the bottom, it would have each outcome. So for example, in the DTLC, our outcomes are to become a writer, a speaker, and a media presence, right? So we have those outcomes. One of our outcomes is also, it's not written in there, but we want you to know your purpose. We want you to have that. So purpose is a big one for us. So then what topics relate to those outcomes? Okay. So what is it that are relating to that? So in our things, we're going to have things about, sharing their message, about knowing about knowing your purpose, about being able to speak. You're going to have all kinds of topics to go with those outcomes, if that makes sense. Okay. So that just kind of gives you an idea, and you can use the same thing for your social media. Okay. So that just kind of gives you an idea to start brainstorming. Okay. Another question, what are you already sharing on social media or with any clients that you have, or maybe you don't have clients yet, but maybe it's what you tell people about. So whatever your one big thing is. So for example, Carrie, I know you're working on a journal, right? And you are talking a lot about miracles and seeing the everyday miracles in your life. So what are some of the quotes and some of the things you're using in that journal, right? Those topics that you're leading them to. Wendy, with the things you teach people with about forgiveness, or, finding, letting go, releasing, going towards light, anything like that. So that gives you ideas. Sometimes we just overthink it because we think, because the big question was that Carrie asked is, will anybody read this? And so so right here is what I have even valuable to anybody. Well, first of all, are people listening? I know that if it's valuable to you and you felt called, it's going to be valuable to somebody. And so we don't want to worry about who it's not valuable for. We want to focus on those who need our message. Because remember, when we flip that lens on that disciple thought leader lens from inward to outward, then we realize that the message comes from our Savior, right? It's for him. So this is a quote I found, and it's all about mindset. And I love this quote. It's in a book by James Carl Butler called The System is the Secret. And he says, remember, change begins with language. Choose to say, believe, and act in accordance with what you want. So do you want it to be true that what you have is not valuable, or do you want it to, right? So if you're like, no, I want it to be valuable, say, okay, I have valuable information to share. Okay. So you're going to just shift how you say that. And I'm kind of cruising through this because I want to be able to go through and show you. So how to get started? Okay. Those of you on here, do any of you have, and these are just ideas, MailerLite, MailChimp, Flowdesk, ActiveCampaign. Do any of you have already an email marketing campaign like that you have? Do you have one? Do either of you have one? I know.
Kind of, yes, but I'm trying to switch it around. I've done MailChimp and MailerLite. I mean, I've set up things, but I haven't been consistent, and I'm meeting with my website gal in the morning. So I'm hoping to connect it to my website.
Okay. And so the question is knowing, sometimes the question I get is, well, which one do I choose? Well, the biggest question is, well, I would go back to what's your one big thing, and does it need to integrate with anything? So like a website, so like anybody who's going to use MemberVault or any kind of, so like I know MemberVault integrates with MailerLite and ActiveCampaign, and I think MailChimp, but I know for sure MailerLite and ActiveCampaign. I know websites like WordPress. You can look into the integrations and see what it integrates with. Many of these, and you can just look, okay, which one? Flowdesk is one it's cheaper. It's not, I don't think it's free in the beginning, but a lot of people like it because it's very feminine and flowy and fun and poppy, and it's easy to use. MailerLite, MailChimp, ActiveCampaign, those are, MailerLite and MailChimp are very easy, and they're free up to 1,000 subscribers. And you can create your own template in there, and they have some templates in there. ActiveCampaign is one I don't recommend until you have over 1,000 subscribers or you have a lot of pieces moving. But if you just have one or two very simple things, then MailerLite and MailChimp can be great. But I know people, big businesses, who use those still. So it just depends on what you're giving. If you're going to lead them to an opt-in, if you're going to lead them to something else, then I would recommend just seeing what it integrates with. So like if you already use something like Acuity, or you use something, any one of those, you're going to go on the back end. If you're just getting started, start with something easy like MailerLite or MailChimp. Okay. Whoops, sorry. Okay. So then, all right. So let's get you guys both have those questions. One of the questions you had, because we talk about where to lead them, and we'll go through that. And this is basically, you're going to, in your newsletter, right? You're going to lead them back to your free opt-in, to a value offering, your one big thing, or even back to your social media, or even one of our gals, she's a coach. And so she leads them back to doing a session with her, to doing a coaching session. So anything like that could work in there. I have a friend that she did a short newsletter that was about gratitude, and she led them right back to Instagram because she loves Instagram. She also hosts a big book club that she does through Zoom, where she actually hosts it in her Facebook group, but she does it live from Zoom to her Facebook group. And that's where she leads everybody, is to her group. So things like that, just think, well, what's my one big thing? Where am I leading them to? Okay. And then some other ideas for content. You could have somebody come do a guest article on there. If you have a topic, hey, I'm doing this, would you be willing to write something for me? If you've done a podcast and you want to put your podcast in there, video. Some people hate the writing thing. So if you're not a writer, do a video. If you already do blog posts, you can do that. Take your social media posts and throw them in there, and then throw some tips in there. Here's 3 tips that I used. I saw one, like I said, my friend who just did one on gratitude, she said, oh yeah, I started this gratitude journal and I have been failing at it. But what I've noticed is when I do gratitude, that's how long it was. That was it. That was her newsletter. And it was short, sweet, and to the point. Others do a longer one. And the biggest thing is to monitor if your people are opening your newsletters and reading it. So, okay. All right. So this is where you guys wanted to know, what do I do, right? So I'm going to hop into MailerLite, and I'm going to show you how to do this. Now, the question that you asked, Wendy, was the style, right? Do we want it branded? Yes, you want it branded as much as possible. So if you have branding, but if you're still working on your branding, don't let that stop you. Just get started. Like, frankly, just get started. And let me show, I'm going to stop my share. And actually I should do a new share. Okay. So I'm going to go in here, and I have permission from Angela to use her MailerLite because I know she's started in there. And so this is MailerLite. So when you get in here, and we're going to show you how to create a newsletter in here. The great thing is once you're in here, when you ask, can we make this doable? Like, yes, we're going to make a template so that you can just like put things in place. The one thing I'll tell you is when you first get started, you might feel like your brain is going like this because you're like, there's so many details. And especially if you're detail oriented, it can feel overwhelming, like really overwhelming. Like, I have to remember everything. You don't have to remember everything. Just remember, you're not going to ruin anything. You can click all the buttons. It's okay. Click all the buttons and find out what they do. I'm one of those. I'm like, click it. You're not going to hurt it. If we all make mistakes, we all send out newsletters with errors in them, and we're like, and we've all gotten them, right? Even from things that said, oh, whoops, we got this mistake. I mean, even our local grocery stores will say, oh, we printed the ad wrong, right? Everybody does it. So don't let that stop you from providing good stuff. Now, you don't want that to make that a habit, right? But still, it's okay. So when you are in MailerLite, the first thing you're going to do is you'll see your dashboard right here. So she's got people who've opted into her opt-in, so she can see how many subscribers she has. It has, when you scroll through, you can see, it just will give you all of this information. Okay. To get started on a newsletter, you're going to hit campaign. Why they call it campaigns, I don't know. Probably political something. I don't know. I have no idea, but we're just going to send it there. So you see, she hasn't started any yet. She hasn't sent any. She has none sitting in her outbox that are getting ready to go. Okay. So she can just hit create campaign on this big orange button. And then you're going to have the title of the campaign. And I'm like, 3 tips to spruce up living room. And that just, and that's actually probably more the text, right? So the campaign name might be, so one thing that we'll do on Connie's end on the back end is we'll put the date, like 1/24/22 newsletter, and then we might say it's a Studio 5 or retreat or purpose challenge or podcast, if that makes sense. So we kind of have an idea on the back end what it is we're sending. It might also be something that you might end up sending a newsletter that's more of a like an ad. So when we are trying to do early bird pricing, the campaign name might be something like early bird retreat, early bird pricing. Okay. So just put that there so you remember what it is, because sometimes you can go back and reuse a past campaign and just change in the dates, which is really helpful. So that way you don't have to recreate things all the time. Okay. So in this case, she's going to have who's it from, and she just might have Angela Ingo. And then she's going to have her address. And when you have your own domain or website, you're going to want it to be like Connie@ConnieSokol.com, right? Not your personal Gmail. But for now, this is what she has. And so that's what it will be. Okay. And then tracking. So next, so she's got that super simple. We're going to hit content. And you can always come back and change the name. If you're like, I don't know what I'm going to name this yet, or subject lines, I don't know. You can always go back and change it before you send it. Okay. So this is where you're going to do a drag and drop editor. Now, where she has an email, she's already done an automation because she has an opt-in. You can either do one or two things. She can do, it looks like templates is like, she has the free plan. So she might have to create one. She hasn't sent any emails, but if you sent an email, you could come back here and reuse one that you've sent. So we're going to hit just create new, and we're just going to do the drag and drop because this makes it easier to do. And this is looking blank. So actually it comes up, there you go, comes up with a template. Okay. And a couple of things. So this is where you're going to start. You don't want this logo. So we're going to go ahead and change her logo. And we just go over here to the right and we hit change. And she's got all of these uploaded. So we'll go ahead and pick one of her logos. And that one's really small. We can make it bigger. We hit save. And you're always going to want to hit save. Okay. And up here, you can always hit preview and test if you want to see what it's going to look like in somebody's inbox or on their phone. Usually you can look at both. Okay. And then you're going to have the title, and this is probably going to be the 3 tips. Oh, I forgot. Mailer Light reminds me, I've got to come over here. 3 tips. Pretend I can spell. So any of that you can have, and she could even link it to something if she wanted to link it to her course. So you just play around with the content, what it looks like. This is where you're going to put your content. One thing just to note as a tip is if you want to do a personal greeting, this is something I learned, is if you do your % and first name, it will grab the first name from your subscriber list. And if they didn't put in a name, it will just leave a blank. So I don't ever put a comma, because if somebody didn't put in their name, it'll just be comma, how are you today, right? So you can do that. If you're going to do this, one tip that we got from another coach that she had learned is that because a lot of people will open their email on their phone, instead of making it a left justified, you could align it to the center. And then that way, when they're reading it on the phone, it's all centered and it doesn't look too wonky. So then you're going to put add content here. Okay. You put your paragraph, whatever you want to tell them, bullet points. And one thing to remember when you're writing your content is that the way our brain sees things, if your brain sees a big paragraph all in one, it's going to feel overwhelmed. But if you take that paragraph and you break up those sentences into different lines, you'll read it faster, right? And you'll you'll really devour that content quicker. So you kind of have to throw some of the conventions away that you learned in high school about writing a paper. Okay. So break up that content a little bit and for that brain. And yes, I love the question you asked, Wendy, when you said, do we have visual, branded? How should it look? I am a big believer that it's good to have something visual in there, whether it's your logo. Some people don't put a logo up top, but it doesn't need to be big and massive, but having a picture there, right? Because our brains are very visual. We're visual people. So having a picture, it could be a picture of you. It could be a picture of, if I wanted to come and change the picture. So if she's going to, oh, that's the edit the image. I always do that. If I want to change it, I remember right here and hit the edit button. So just so you know, sometimes I'm like, wait, I can actually delete that. There we go. And now I can hit browse. And if I don't have one on here I can upload image, but I'll just pick one. She has one of a living room in here. Okay, so there's one of her pictures. So she could have a picture of that. And like I said, you can make it big or small. Okay. And if I want to add more, I'm going to hit save over here. Now on the left, you can see there are drag and drop things. If you're like, oh, I need something else. Like let's say this has a logo plus a content, a title, a subtitle and title, a title and a button. So if I want, okay, I want to lead them somewhere, but I want to say, oh gosh, I do this all the time. But over here on the side, you always got to edit on the side. But if you want to say, get my free or whatever your act, right? Whatever it is you want to send them to, then you can edit this button right here. And then you can put the URL wherever it's going to lead them. Or let's see so Wendy, if you want to say book a 15-minute free session or discovery call, you could do any of that. You can even do that here on this link. You want to lead them somewhere at the end, whether it's you want them to click somewhere and you only really want them to click one place. Sometimes you could have two things in there. That second thing is usually to follow you on social media. It could be somewhere else, but lead them somewhere, whether it's that you're going to give them something free, you're going to lead them to your community, you're going to lead them to your Instagram, Facebook page, LinkedIn page, or booking a session, anything like that, lead them somewhere. Okay. That way they'll click. And so look, it has all kinds of things in here, but we just delete them out. If you're like, okay, I don't like this. That's the great thing is you can just keep deleting it. On the button right here, it says write a strong CTA, just as a reminder, means call to action. So we want them to do something. So that's where am I leading? So CTA, call to action. Do you want them to book a call? Do you want them to go watch a podcast? Do you want them to go get your free ebook or buy your book? Does that make sense? Any questions on that? And you can change the colors. So on the button settings, you can change, where do I want the button? Do I want it the right, the middle, right? And I go to the button over here and that little thing pops up and that's where I can brand it and I can find my colors. I can hit more colors. So like these are some of her colors. So I could change it to one of her colors. Does that make sense? So whatever color is yours, you can brand it. Okay. So that's how you do it. And you can change even the lettering. You just kind of play with that. This one has so many different things in there. Okay. This has helpful links. So one thing that I notice, and Marnie's on here. Hi, Marnie. Marnie sometimes will reference something and she'll put a link to a reference that she talked about. Now, I'm a big believer in newsletters. Like I said, lead them to one thing. If you have a blog, lead them to a blog, and then put those helpful links at the bottom of your blog. Okay. Unless that link is something you've already written and you want them to go read an article you've done. Okay. A question I get all the time, and then you want some kind of closing, like, I can't wait to connect with you. See you soon, and then have your name, your signature at the bottom. Okay. Anything like that. What I would say when you do a newsletter, write it how you would talk to somebody. So if you're like, what would I say? Maybe you say it out loud while you're typing. Okay. Write it out how you would. And then you're going to go back and edit it, but you want it to be in your voice. Because sometimes we have a writing voice and we have a speaking voice, but we want this to be your personality. We want this to be you. We want this to be connecting with your audience, so it nurtures them. And then this at the very bottom, I get asked all the time, do I have to have my address in there? Yes, you do. Whatever your business address is, whether it's your home address, or maybe you have a business address somewhere else, but you have to have a physical address by law. Okay. So, and usually this is auto put in here. Like, she didn't put this in here. It's auto put in there because when she set up her account, it has it in there. Okay. So
You can do PO box there, right?
Actually, they may not be able, I can't remember. Something tells me you have to have your physical address.
So can I ask a question about that, Lemire? I haven't put that in yet. So that's new. That's like new information that I obviously have skipped. So would I just put my home address, or should I just put my husband's business, or what would you recommend? And why do you have to have a physical address in there?
It's just because of the compliance, all that new stuff that's come about the compliance. They want to make sure that you're not just some spammer out there spamming, that if somebody came to look you up, they could find you. But
is that a Miller Lite thing, or just the industry in general?
Industry in general. That's like, it's like that. I can't remember. So especially if you are going to be doing anything international, the European compliance is different than the United States compliance. So they're pretty strict. So that's why I do recommend not putting your phone number on there though. So like, you don't have to have a phone number. If you have a 1-800 number, go ahead. But I just wouldn't. We've had times where people in the beginning, when you start small, somebody might have your number. But I know recently Connie had somebody contact her from a long time ago and called her and said, hey, I have all this stuff from like years ago. I'm trying to cash in for this. Does that make sense? And she's like, oh, forgetting who has her number. And so especially as your subscriber list grows, what you want them to do is eventually lead them to like a scheduler, right? Where they go through that and they're scheduling with you. When you start out in the beginning, if you're going to do phone calls, that's up to you, but you don't need your phone number there, but you do have to have some sort of address. Marnie, if you wanted to put your husband's business address, you could.
Okay.
But you just need some sort of physical address.
I'll use his.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. And then
that's why I was wondering for confidentiality. You don't necessarily want,
Yeah. The reason they do that is just, it really is because you're a legitimate business, right? So that's why. And, but yeah, I understand that, but if that's where you're at, and that's why I said PO box, maybe you could do that, but a lot of them will require a physical address. So, okay. That's basically how you're going to kind of set up your content, your newsletter. Always hit save. And you can change these buttons down here as we scroll down. Trying to think if I had it on here. Oh, the social links. And this is where you'd want to go ahead and lead them straight to those little buttons at the bottom, whatever you have. And it doesn't have to be Twitter. You could have LinkedIn. If you have a YouTube, you have Vimeo account, WordPress, right? Any of these you can put on there and just put your link right there. So your Facebook group, your Instagram page, whatever that is, your blog, whatever you want to lead them directly to, then it will show up at the bottom. Okay. Hey, the next thing I always do is you want to preview it. So you hit preview mode on the top right corner. I highly recommend what you're going to want to do is send a test to yourself to read through it. I also recommend having somebody else look at it. The reason you do that is because you're going to miss something, especially if you've read over it like 15 times, right?
Well, can I just say one more thing? Like, I have my college student, I'm like, I will pay you to edit. And he does every week and it's beautiful, but he didn't edit my subject line. So I missed a word. It's not his fault. But remember to ask whoever's editing to check even that out.
I love that. I've done that before too, where you
Yeah.
send that subject and you're like, oh, and then it comes to you and you're like, did I write that? Did that happen to me? Yeah. And I'll come to subject lines in a minute. So let me come back to that. So you can look at the mobile, right? You just see how it's going to show up on somebody's email and then on their desktop. Okay. You can save it. Look, on MailerLite, you can save it as a PDF and download it. And if you wanted to share it with somebody like, hey, Lemire, you take a look at this and send it, or a friend. Okay. We X out of that. If we said we're done editing. Carrie, is this helping you feel a little bit easier about everything, about that it's not as hard?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay,
That's right.
good.
Come on.
Sometimes you just need to see somebody walk us through it, right? That's me. Sometimes
Yeah.
I need to see it. Okay. And then this says, hey, where are you going to send this to? Now you see it has groups. So groups in MailerLite is if you have an opt-in, right? She's got her opt-in to her free download. That's the group she has. If she does another automation, she can do another group that might be her course, right? So like, for instance, in Connie's, in ActiveCampaign, they call them tags. Different email systems call them different things. So in us, we have different tags. So we have a tag that's like the DTLC. We have a tag that's the January retreat, a tag that will be the April retreat, right? We have a tag that's a specific course, but they all go in to the subscribers. And when you do a newsletter, I always say it's going to everybody. Okay. Because when they opt into anything, I automatically put them on our newsletter. They can opt out anytime. We tell them that's fine. I have probably opted in and out to some of the same newsletters several times because I'm like, oh, I'm done with that. And I'm like, oh, wait, do they still do that? And I go back and find them and I opt in again. So that's okay. Okay. And then I'm going to hit next, review and confirm. I'm not going to really send this because then everybody's going to get some kind of crazy newsletter. And this is where you can preview it. This is where you want to send a test email to yourself and you put it in there and just put in your own email. It will send to you. And you can also send it to like your son or whoever's going to edit it. Okay. And then this will be, hey, I want to track it. I want to track if people are clicking or if they're going to go through, because it is so important to see who opens it, or, well, it's important to see who, but mainly how many people open it and how many click through, because are they enjoying your content, or do we need to shift some things? And there's going to come a time where you get lots of opens and then you get not very many. And then you kind of shift and you go, oh, is it the content? Is it my subject line? You know, what is it that needs to shift? Do I need to reshift the look of it? You know, what's happening? Okay. So this is where you could edit your subject. And I recommend when you do a subject that you write down 10 different subject lines, possibly, that you could send, and find your favorite one. Some things that are going to stand out. One, if you have something that's like a how to do this, 3 tips, a question will trigger people. I say, is your living room looking dull? You know, or something like that. Another thing is if you put an emoji, not too many emojis, just like one emoji. Okay. You don't want it to sound too salesy. Sometimes you could say free this, but if it sounds too spammy, people's emails will mark them as spam and throw them in their junk folder. Okay. So you just kind of go, okay, but just play with it. Remember, don't let any of this stop you and say, oh, it has to be perfect. Nope, just do it. Do it messy. Do it. Just get started. Okay. And then after everything looks okay, I'm going to hit next, schedule it. So this is a great thing about newsletters. So let's say you suddenly have all this content idea, because you know how sometimes you get a content dump in your brain. You're like, oh, I could talk about this or this or this. Do them all at once, like do 3 different newsletters, and then you can schedule it out to send later. At what time? If you're like, okay, I'm going to do one now and I'm going to do one in 2 weeks or next week. Okay. And then you just schedule it out, and then you'll hit schedule, and then it will schedule it out, or you can send it right away and send it off. Okay. So that's basically how that works. And then I'm going to click back here on campaigns. Now we haven't sent it yet, but you can see there's a draft there. Okay. And if it's in the out box, that means we schedule it to go out, but it hasn't gone yet. And then once we send it, it will be in the sent folder. So when she goes to create a new campaign, so let's hit, but we're going to create another one. You can go through it again, but when you get to content, I don't know if it'll let me. I'm just going to do a test. Angela's going to come back in and be like, what did you do? Give it just a second. I just want to be able to show you how you can get resend a campaign, so you don't have to redo your whole logo every time. That it should be able to be in there. It's just taking a minute, sorry. And then I'll wrap up. Okay, it's taking a minute. Okay, there we go. Sorry, the chat showed up. Okay, right here. So now if I have the email design and I want to create a new, if I go to my recent emails, oh, it doesn't have it. Once it sends, I can click that and I can use that template, if that makes sense. I would be able to click it and then just change out the information. Okay, so that's how that works. Are there any questions on MailerLite? Or just so you know, I'm using MailerLite, but most email things are similar. They're going to be very similar. There might be some shifts in what they call it or where you find it, but most of them are going to be similar. Okay. Any questions that I can answer on any of that, or any newsletter questions you have? I'm happy to answer them.
I have a question, Lumaira. And I'm sorry, I didn't get on the first part of the call. Maybe you answered it. As far as how often, did you have any tips on that?
That's a great question. So I did not answer that one yet. How often is consistent? My answer is be consistent. So decide what it is. It might be, so a good thing is, let's say you have a podcast and you release a podcast every week, then you should have a newsletter every week. Okay. If you could tell people it's going to be once a week, twice a month, once a month, anything like that, just consistent is what I would say. And the reason I say consistent is one is that so people can expect something from you. Okay. 2, people remember that you're out there, that you have services. I like to say twice a month is a really good way to go and once a month at minimum. But if you're just getting started, you could even do once a quarter. So for example, where we have, somebody who's in the education realm, she might do a monthly newsletter that's like a themed newsletter, right? What's happening? Because in education, sometimes you have those themes, right? But if you have, like Connie, you could do, I know some people do quarter, but I really do recommend once a week. She does twice a week, but that's because she usually has a podcast and we have content. Now, if we don't have a podcast, we usually try to do one, because you don't want to spam. And sometimes it might be more if you have a promotion that you're throwing out there. And that's okay to throw one in as long as you're not doing it all the time. Now, when somebody hooks onto your newsletter, they go through an opt-in, you usually have like a welcome sequence where it has the one email where it says, hey, so happy, here's your free thing. And you might have 2 or 3 emails total. One that says who you are, what you do, and 3 inviting them somewhere to your community, or something else, right? That's usually what, and then they hook onto your newsletter. So did that answer that question for you? Yeah. And the reason I say is pick a time and do it is because you want to get into that system and into that flow. And then once you get into that, you can find somebody to help do that. If you're like, hey, I'm going to give you the content, will you go put out my newsletter? But here's the content for the next month, if you have a content dump. So, and if you have somebody doing a blog for you where they put it up there, and actually sometimes we'll do that is we'll take a blog post that Connie's done or social media post if we need content, and we'll take that and we'll turn it into the newsletter. So
that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I haven't jumped into podcasts, but I do the blog, and then I take a piece of that and do the newsletter and then a social media thing. And it's once a week and it's a lot, but it's helped me to be in connection and get in the flow and know that I can do it. I don't know if it's necessary to do it weekly, but I say weekly at present, and I don't know if I need to change it to bi-weekly, but it's all good. I'm figuring it out.
yeah. And if you find that you feel like it's overwhelming, you could also look at your content and see if you want to pare it down and make 2 newsletters out of that, or a newsletter series, and say, okay, I have this big long blog post and this great content, but could I break it up into 3 pieces and make a monthly newsletter? Does that make sense? Or like a weekly for a whole month? That way it doesn't feel like you have to sit down every week and do it. But I would recommend, if you're going to do weekly and you don't have that whole thing, then just set aside a time and say, okay, I'm doing my newsletter, 15 minutes, get it ready, or I'm going to do it for the month and it's on this day at the end of the last month or something. And then you can take that, and also that's where your social media content might come from as well. I'm all about leveraging all of that. And we worry, are they going to see too much of the same thing? No. How many times do we have to see something before it actually sticks, right? Or that we click that button, or we go, oh, that's like, for instance, I think I got one of your newsletters recently and I thought, oh yeah, she does sessions. Let me go click on that. Oh yeah, she does offer that. Does that make sense? But it won't recall unless it's in a time of need. Does that make sense? And so when I need it, it's there. So, all right. Any other questions? Please feel free. Or where are you at? Are you feeling any obstacles, or how do I get going? Is there anything like that you're like, do you need an accountability where I'm going to check on you and say, hey, your goal is to do this. Did you get it done? So what can I help you with?
I have another really quick question. I remember it used to be that your subject line would keep it out of, for example, promotions versus inbox. Is that still the same? Like, you're wanting to do a good subject line in order to keep it out of the promotions?
I've read some things and I have to look and see, but typically sometimes like Google will automatically put it in a promotions folder anyway. Sometimes it's how often they open it and check it. Do you know what I mean? So, but yeah, a subject line will shift that a little bit. So that's why if you just say, hey, free book, people are going to open it. But here's what I've noticed on a Google account on my desktop, it will split it out into promotions. Junk is different. Junk is like spammy Nigeria people like trying to give me their will, right? Telling me I'm in their will. But if it's a promotions and I know it's coming from like Wendy Christensen, my Gmail will put it in promotions. But when I look on my phone, because my phone doesn't separate it out, it's in my inbox. Does that make sense? So I don't know if that makes sense or not. But like when I open my email on my phone, I just see everything right there. And then when I get on my desktop, it's put it into updates, forums, promotions, and I can see I have a new one. And so I can go check it. So some people don't if they're really busy, but somebody like me who likes a clean inbox, I go check it. So, but just as a tip, like if it's Gmail, don't stress about that as much, because if they're checking it on their phone, it'll show up right there. So it's spammy versus, it becomes spammy if you're sending an email like every day, right? And then you're going to get unsubscribed.
Mine split up on my phone too, but
oh, does it? Okay.
it does split up on my phone.
And maybe
but
it's
it's
because
fine.
I choose not to. And maybe it's because I'm not, you know, it just depends on how I have it. So, all right. Okay. Any other questions?
I want to get to where you're at though, where I have so many things in my inbox promotions. I need to go clean it out.
Well, that's usually I go through and I'm like, oh, ding, 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 ding. That's like, I trash it. So, but there are things that I'll go through. And this is something to keep in mind. A newsletter might think it gets thrown into promotions, but I'll tell you what, how many of us go through that and they're like, oh, I saved that one because I wanted to come back to it. And I start it and then I go back and read it again. Does that make sense? So just because it goes into somebody's promotions folder doesn't mean they won't read it later. So keep sending it. That's the hard thing. It's like, oh, what if? I'm like, nope, don't worry about that. So, okay. Let me see if there's anything I missed. Nope. Okay, I just wanted to ask if, okay, did you get something out of today? Or what was one thing that you got out that you're like, oh, that was good or helpful? What was helpful for you today?
For me, it was seeing all of the buttons you could add in and where to do. I didn't know that. So that for me was really helpful, where you could add in like click here and this will take you to my website, or click here. So for me, that was really great to see it all laid out as, you know, sending it.
And the great thing is you don't have to go in there and like be a scrapbooker to do it, right? You can get rid of that Ward newsletter mentality, you know, throw it in there. So great. Oh, good. I'm glad that was helpful. Carrie, anything that was helpful for you?
Yeah, I think the same, just having you go through it so that I can see in real time how that all works, instead of trying to, you know, just stare at the screen going, okay, so now what do I do next?
Right. Where do I go?
So, yeah. But other things like, you know, that you were talking about with address and things like that, that I would have had no clue. So those things were all good. So now I just need to get my brain working so I can put some things together.
My suggestion with that is set a goal for you, for any of you on here, when your next newsletter is going to go out. Or like in Marnie's case, if it's something of how to leverage it better, right? To make it work for you better in a system. How could you systemize it and make that easier? And same with you, Wendy, if you're like, okay, I feel so busy, when am I going to do this? Maybe it's okay, when I plan my social media or I do that, say, oh, I'm going to save that as a newsletter to go out later. And that's the thing, is you can have the same subject go out in a year with a little bit different tweak, a different picture, or sometimes we'll grab things from Canva. And because if you are Canva or anything like that, Shutterstock, any of those that you subscribe to, or Adobe, any of that, you can grab those stock photos and put it in there. We've started to, now that we have our own events, we take photos from our events as much as possible so that we have like real people. So, you know, when you see a social media post or newsletter, like, hey, I know that person, or hey, I was there, right? You feel connected to it. So, Marnie, anything that was helpful for you today?
So much. I love the opportunity to just go in and clean up. I've just feel like a cowboy, like I've just gone in there and tried to figure it out, and love the little tips and tricks of even can't wait to connect with you. Instead of saying all my best, like there's a reason we're connecting. We're here to help when they need it. It's not a pushy thing. It's just an invitation, and just to keep sharing and developing that community. So thank you for all of that.
Good. Thank you. All right, ladies. So I'm just going to encourage you to make a goal, a newsletter goal, and to set your next right step with your newsletter.